So with that, I introduced Pete McKinley. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you for that introduction. Thanks everybody for being here. Here being my living room. I'm getting better at this format, like any of us who have had to adapt. And anytime I grouse about it, I've had my boss remind me, well, what would you propose would be the alternative? So, and a bird walk with all of you in the next summer would be my alternative. But in the meantime, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about this monarch caterpillar, because that kind of links the big to the small, and the top-down ecological planning to the mechanisms at which things actually happen. I'm a conservation biologist by training, bird biologist, actually warbler ecologist, and my experience is maybe a mile wide, inch deep. There might be a little more topography, maybe a couple inches deep in places. But some of my background includes commercial working with a commercial company to certify their lands under the Forest Stewardship Council, and a timber company. And so, so a lot of the lands, in fact, in the map of the main High Peaks headwaters, priority land projects, a lot of those conservation projects are working forest conservation easements. And this represents the work of the last 20 years. And you look at on the right at the map of the Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust properties. And in an era where us ecologists, and I think it's percolated into the more general readership, we talk about the importance of connecting landscapes, connectivity across gradients of elevation and topography and so forth. And you look at these disparate parcels, whether you're looking in the North Maine woods, where I spend a lot of my day job, or in my volunteer time, the patches of conserved lands on our peninsula and the neighboring peninsulas. At first glance, it could be discouraging because you say, wow, there are a lot of small parcels. The encouraging news is that in between, there's a lot of forested, wetland covered, riparian covered parcels still there, and active conservation underway with our land trust community. But I think the point or the message today is kind of carried forth by that little caterpillar. So that is my parents. They're in their mid 80s. That is one of their flower gardens in Bristol, Maine, and Mom loves her planting her flowers and tries to plant natives, and in this case planted butterfly weed, not the butterfly bush, which is the genus Buddleia, but this is the butterfly weed, which is a native, and was telling my dad and me that the monarchs were going to be falling out of the sky and laying their eggs. And I'm used to thinking at the scale of these big maps, and how many acres, in the Maine High Peaks headwaters. You can see the square shows you where that is in Maine. It's up near Saddleback and Sugarloaf, Mount Abraham. It's the Orbiton stream drains into the Kennebec, and ultimately the Kennebec empties out right over there by Southport and Sheepscot Bay. And so I'm used to thinking in big parcels and identifying ecological values and tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres of land conserved, and then in our neck of the woods here, coastal rivers, we're looking at tens and hundreds. But it turns out that on my folks' 1 acre patch, we had a conservation success, I'd say, and I certainly an educational success, because I thought, well, okay, that's nice. They might attract the butterflies. Well, we had 24 of these caterpillars rapidly consuming the butterfly weed. So I could not follow the fates of them. I looked for the pupa and couldn't find them. But that's, I think, serves as kind of an intro into this linkage between the big landscapes and large scale projects but what we can do in our own backyards. One of many examples of what we can do in our own backyards. And I alluded to the national level work that I've talked about on the right. This is a map of the ecological integrity from of the eastern forest from Georgia to Maine along the Appalachian Trail. A lot of my work includes trying to conserve a larger swath of land adjacent to the trail. Dark green means high ecological integrity or low human footprint. High ecological integrity is roughly an index of fidelity to pattern and process prior to settlement, prior to European settlement anyway. And the paper on the left was done at the national level, and it's always nice to see that when at these national levels, Maine pops up with ecological integrity and biodiversity scores and other scores on par with the crown of the continent and other areas out in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, the bigger, vaster, wilder areas. But Maine, of course, is still largely forested. And you can even see a slightly darker shade of green down toward, I don't know if my mouse is, hopefully the mouse is showing, that's our neck of the woods. So the story I want to tell today is about, is continental scale, it's Maine scale, it's talking about linkages in the North Woods is what I'm talking about now, and then linkages, ecological linkages, ecological connectivity, especially in the context of climate change, down to our area right here. So this is Pemaquid. I believe I got Pemaquid Point right there. So just for orientation's sake, these light areas are our roads, and this big northern forest is the biggest, darkest, dark being dark as in darkened night skies, and dark as in dark green, meaning high ecological integrity, east of the Mississippi. And the high peaks, you saw this map earlier, much the same as it is for us here in the peninsula. It's a mixture of values and uses. And there's resource extraction, sportsmen, sportswomen, hiking, motorized transport, all manner. And our approach is to try to find the best place for all the above, or the best places. Sometimes they're not compatible and they don't always overlap, but my job is to use maps to find areas of the highest ecological integrity, core values, conserve those, hopefully in low to no management use. And but in order to get the acreage that we need to conserve to maintain these populations of pine marten and black-throated green warbler and Atlantic salmon, wood frog, and some kind of dragonfly, or is that a damselfly? I forget. Dragonflies, I think, have the wings extended when they're at rest. But anyway, that's for another time. And hunting and fishing and so forth are all part of this Big Ten approach to landscape conservation. That, I think, is important to remember and apply at a smaller scale, because the size of land that we need to conserve and the many styles of management that landowners might undertake, I think require a good dialogue and open conversation. And here we have the Pemaquid River in Bristol Mills a couple autumns ago, Pemaquid Harbor, and a paddle with some friends. Long history of human use. This midden right near Salt Bay, just downstream of the Route 1 overpass, I guess anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 years old. Long history of human use and current human use, fishing, logging operations, and conservation for conservation's sake and conservation for biodiversity's sake. This photo right here taken out at Laverna Preserve. And again, looking back to this bigger picture, we have conservation lands under various levels of management. Some is strict ecological reserve, some is multiple use, some is the owner may gather firewood on some easements, but it's not an area where commercial harvests are. We don't have many so-called working forest easements, at least the kind I'm familiar with from up north on the peninsula. But I guess the point is, there are different kinds of conservation and protection. And then the underlying theme here is that there's a lot of land that is in between, and we try to identify those lands, as I said earlier, for the next conservation project. But in the meantime, or in perpetuity, it's up to landowners, individual landowners, to do whatever they wish, but hopefully do little things to medium things to big things, from planting butterfly weed to being intentional about the kinds of harvests they design. And in particular, one of the values that I seek out, I've alluded to it already, human footprint or ecological integrity. This is a data set that I worked on, and not the prettiest of map. I use maps as an analytical tool, but I'm not a cartographer. I definitely need to improve those skills. But darker green means a bigger patch of forest. So if my mouse is indeed tracing the forests on this map on the right, darker green are the bigger patches of forest that we seek to conserve and protect. They represent oftentimes the highest value for conservation. Not always. There's some smaller areas, especially those associated with aquatic features, that are high value. Not always the case that bigger is better, but we keep on talking about, and I keep on talking about, size and connectivity, and these are important for population viability, climate adaptation, climate resilience, and so the idea is that as we fill in these blanks in between conservation parcels, we're guided by natural resource maps, or as landowners are looking to do a timber harvest, or say subdivide and create another lot, or allow a crossing of a recreational trail, that I want to make it known, and I'm sure many of you here already do know, that there are a variety of resources available that help us in who make our daily bread doing conservation, but also help us landowners figure out how and where to put or design or construct a timber harvest. Now, typically people undergoing who are undertaking a timber harvest will hire a forester, but this might also apply to your own management, weekend management of the forest, and just to be aware of these maps is all you need. All you need from me tonight, I hope, is what I'm communicating, is the existence of these maps. These are beginning with habitat maps from the Beginning with Habitat site, website with the Maine Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife, and they describe a variety of ecological and conservation values. Earlier, I was talking about the multi-use values, natural resources. My specialty are the ecological and natural resource values, so I've chosen to highlight these here. But certainly there are many overlapping values. A big contiguous patch of forest is also a big contiguous woodlot. By understanding where the vernal pools are, the highest wetland habitat value areas, the water and stream habitat value, it helps us steer how we might develop a lot, how someone might go about developing a lot. Sometimes there are cluster zoning waivers sought in towns all across the United States, and collaborative arrangements with conservation groups try to figure out, okay, where could we put the development, and where could we put into permanent trust conservation land, or at least land that is managed for some of the conservation values. So again, these Sarah, I think, is going to assemble and distribute a list of these resources that you may use for grab online, and even reach out and have a specialty customized map made by the Beginning with Habitat biologists. And these are the kinds of data layers that people like me and land trusts also have on their own machines and ArcGIS to conduct their own analyses. Among these data layers are, you may have heard of ecological resilience, a data set published by the Nature Conservancy that takes into account numerous ecological values, biodiversity, contiguity, connectivity, and and predicted resilience to climate change. That is the capacity for the populations of animals and plants to adapt. I've alluded to the undeveloped habitat blocks or ecological integrity. The map to your right shows the large blocks, and this is these maps are a subsection of the peninsula of Damariscotta in particular, but they're available for all of Maine. And I just chose to pick this representation, but they do continue west into Booth Bay and east over past Muscongas and then down to the tip of the peninsula. But plant and animal habitat, high value habitat in the upper left, shown by cross hatching. The fine print, I don't think I could read with a microscope, but that just came along with the image. And again, the idea that these resources are available and downloadable and free, open to the public. So, and undeveloped habitat blocks combined with plant and animal habitat, combined with all the other value sets, gives us a composite of habitat and landscape values. When I talk about landscape, I'm talking about those concepts of big patches, connected patches. Some of what we are looking and interested in doing is more proactively identifying the parcels that have the high habitat value and that connect these many blocks that we're piecing together in the conservation estate. And I think at the beginning of the 70s, before land trusts even existed, or maybe it was late 70s, it was a matter of opportunity. Land, something was for sale, a local group got together and incorporated as an association and conserved a favorite place for walking, such as Dodge Point, which I'm circling right here along the Damariscotta River. And now we're trying to be a little more intentional about the lands that we pick. It may be to stitch together a corridor for recreation along the Pemaquid River, to have a protected corridor alongside a day-long paddle. That's also habitat. And we're also trying to protect the large blocks of forest, because as I'll explain in a sec, what the animals need are duplicate or replicate areas of habitat by hearing or seeing one individual or one animal, that's not the measure we're after. We're after population viability, and population viability usually depends on large connected tracts. So for the ability for me to hear a hermit thrush somewhere in this landscape 20 years from now depends on the continued existence and connectivity of this entire landscape. The wood thrush, sadly, we've seen it go into decline, and we don't hear it that much here anymore. And one of the reasons is the habitat loss. You need mature habitat in larger blocks for the wood thrush to maintain a viable population. Not all birds do. The chestnut-sided warbler, an early successional bird, is very comfortable using the shrub layer. Black-throated green warbler, more mature forest community type here over to the right in the more mature cereal stages. So getting back to the land and thinking about that caterpillar and the kinds of things one can do, whether it's participating in town policy or participating with your land trust or back on your own woodlot, or chatting with a neighbor who's about to do some timber harvest management. It's not all or none. I'm not here to say don't harvest, but I was employed in the industry many years ago and was trying to do conservation within the industry with forest stewardship certification. And it's a matter of a gradient of effort. And so leaving clumps of mature forest trees within a harvest or within a development are important interim measures you can take. And the tree species diversity is important as well. Here on the peninsula, we have remnant spruce and fir left over from the last glacial period and surviving in these coastal fog forests, so to speak. And we have a range of mature and early successional balsam fir and red spruce habitat here in the on the peninsula. And oftentimes you'll hear the black-throated green out there foraging in the softwood and mixed-wood forests. Again, using closed canopy forest. I talked a little bit about forest fragmentation and patch size and fragmentation effects. And the wood thrush was a bird that that I studied in the early 90s, and many others did too. I was jumping on a neotropical migratory study bandwagon as we were discovering warblers were declining. And it wasn't that necessarily that the net habitat available was lost. You might have the same amount of habitat, but if it's in multiple fragments, such as depicted in this schematic on the lower right, you won't have enough of a patch for any one wood thrush. So whereas the fragmented area on the right, whereas the large unfragmented patch might support 5, 10 wood thrush, the patches on the right probably wouldn't support any wood thrush. At least that's the dynamic that has been measured, determined, and found again and again, and that I'm trying to depict here. So why don't we have the wood thrush out on the Dodge Reserve anymore like I did here at 10 years ago? I don't know. I mean, as a scientist, that could be just chance. Maybe someone here on this Zoom meeting can say, well, actually, no, I've been hearing them just down the way, and I'd love to hear that. But the wood thrush is known to be undergoing national declines. Black-throated green warblers holding stable, and so one of the things we can do, just like my mom did and taught me, it was last summer, and like I say, I thought, oh yeah, sure, it's called butterfly weed, and the butterflies will be here, and sure, she had faith, and sure enough, we didn't see the butterflies, but the larvae appeared, so the adults had to have been there. And there are things we can do, whether it's through our local land trusts or through on our own woodlots, or talking with our neighbors with woodlots on making a difference, one animal, one population at a time. And who knows, with climate change and with some of these animal species, and I'm loading this with birds because that's what I know and do, but this applies to mammals, it applies to insects, even applies to marine aquatic organisms. Certainly they're not migrating into the upper Appalachians like the black-throated green warbler might, but just as an example of the importance of large-scale connectivity for resilience, it's quite possible that the black-throated green warblers of the southern extent of their range or the coastal extent of their range might be a variant that will eventually replace the black-throated green warblers of the North Woods that are a variant that it seems to prefer and use colder climates. So it's a lot of what we do is it's an experiment in progress, and I cannot give you the proof that black-throated green warbler of the coast will someday be the inheritor of the North Woods, but it might very well, and that's, I think, an example of diversifying the conservation portfolio. The strategy is to have as many different types of not just species, but variation within species as possible. So back to the coast and back to what you can do. I think one of the first things I like, it's fun, and it's a great starting point. It was driven home yesterday. Sarah came by my house and was asking about wanted to do a survey or look for tomcod, a species of fish, and I was reporting all the birds that I saw in Kastner Creek out behind my house, and so an important first step, I think, for the citizen conservationist out there is to know your animals and know your plants. And that isn't just the identification, but it's the behavior and the habits. And so here's a black-throated green warbler with a beak full of insects. Now, and a common tern with fish, and that's Witch Island right there in the center. And there are a lot of terns. If you've been to especially Pemaquid Harbor, a lot of terns foraging there. and carrying their food to provision young on offshore nesting islands. So knowing your natural history, I think, is a good first step to being a conservationist, and certainly we conserve what we love. And if you know their stories, you're probably more likely to love them. And from a population viability point of view, if a warbler, in this case the black-throated green, or a tern, are carrying food, that means they are going to provision young. They are going to feed some young. So one of the key observations in the course of a summer of a biologist is, are the animals reproducing? Because that's a step more information, more knowledge, more success documented than just seeing the individual. That means that they've paired, that they found enough food to build eggs, and are rearing young. And of course, the next step with birds anyway is to see if they successfully fledge. So another point I wanted to bring home on this, when you look at the black-throated green warbler foraging, talked a little bit about forest management. This is kind of a nice cross section. I could have picked a sterile diagram of forest composition, age, structure, and so forth, but I thought this photo does a pretty good job of it. What you're looking at is not just a bunch of trees, but a mixture: white pine, there's balsam fir mixed in, and some spruce and hemlock too, I believe, a lot of oak on Witch Island, and a diversity of heights. So after about 60 years after a harvest or some other windthrow disturbance event, you might start getting a forest that looks like this. And that's the kind of thing to be thinking about if you are a woodlot manager and enlisting a forester, and you might hear the oft repeated, well, we're going to cut a lot of wildlife patches. Well, that is true. Cutting a patch will generate local diversity for species that use early successional habitat. And indeed, there are a lot of places where we are seeing early successional species decline. There are a lot of places too where we are seeing the late successional or mature forest species decline. So I'm not making a blanket statement either way, other than to just suggest you be aware of forest age class, forest structure, and forest composition. Here's another fun picture. This is where I'm trying to bring it home to the local things you can do. This is actually on Witch Island. These were trees that were thrown by wind or broken by wind. Now, I don't advocate leaving trees like this on a well-used trail and a well-used public access point. But if it is the backwoods and you're not concerned about it being a hazard on your property, under the category of the little things we can do on the land in all those patches in between the conserved blocks, this is habitat, or habitat on the make. Dead downed woody debris. These are pretty fresh breaks, but will eventually be would have eventually been logs on the grounds supporting a variety of insects and small mammals, rodents, shrews, voles that forage on them. Same goes for standing dead as well. But in no way am I suggesting that they should have been left. In fact, I think at least one of the people involved in cleaning that up is on the call today. So good work, and in some cases, yes, we want to keep the trails open and safe. So these are a couple pics taken from some of the work I do up north. Another department or area of consideration, or an area for forethought is water crossings and building buffers, or maintaining buffers, I should say. Building sounds like I'm talking about stacking up some kind of retaining wall. But the BMP manual that I took a pic of that was sitting on my shelf is showing filter widths, those cross sections of trees, or those donuts or circles in the diagram are showing the density of tree stems left, with the stream on the left, the stream on the left in the picture. And the idea being that when there's possibility of water movement and soil transport and erosion, one of the best things we can do is leave a buffer. And so again, this is just to point you toward a variety of resources that used to be you would have to drive to your ranger station, but now it's all online. So this is the kind of thing that you can get from the state or from at the federal level too, for federal land managers. Guidelines and recommendation for road building. Probably not too many of us here are contemplating going out and building a road, but it also applies to hiking trails and especially areas with water crossings. And this is a bridge in actually Reddington Township up north of Sugarloaf and Saddleback, and it's a 10,000 acre easement project I worked on, and this was part of the baseline documentation for the easement, and under agreement prior to closing, this bridge was to be removed, and indeed it was. So just a little more dramatic than maybe the kinds of bridges or erosion issues we would have here on the peninsula, but serves as a reminder that water transport and BMPs, or as they say, best management practices, are another one of those small localized activities you can employ. Also too, in the center photo, mowing. Here, this patch is actually my backyard, and these are hosta, so not necessarily a native. They were there when I bought the place with these big pasture oaks, bunch of Canada geese out there in Castner Creek. And it's because half because I'm lazy, half because I want to create or maintain firefly habitat. But I think I mow it once a summer and try not to get too close to the marsh when I do it. Here's Castner Creek again, salt marsh and a nice hardwood buffer with the extensive fields just about 100 feet in from this buffer. And over here is a conservation project that CRCT undertook. There's an easement, and part of the easement included a buffer along this salt marsh strip right here. And here's a pic from Pemaquid Harbor. There's my dad pulling at the oars, and this field across the way. There are different recommendations for the width of a buffer, but here there is a buffer. We've got trees. It's structure for perching animals. There's a spruce tree out here that I often see eagle and osprey perching on when they're not perched on the masthead of my sailboat and digesting fish for me on the fiberglass coach top. And the fields up here, they have paths mowed, but generally mow it once a year. That's another consideration for your own, potentially your own forest, or in this case, field management, is if you do hay it or mow it, hold off, because that's habitat for insects and birds such as the bobolink. So closing it up here, back to this patch. I look at the patches, and I think of all the hours that went into negotiating. Some I helped a little bit on, but mostly done long before I moved to, some of them done since moving to Damariscotta 10 years ago, a lot of them done before. We've got the river link in progress over here. But when we talk about conservation, effective corridor sizes, we've got the trail protected on the river link, but certainly from an ecological effectiveness point of view, it ought to be wider. It needs to be wider. And we use maps, just to review, such as these natural resource maps. This is the co-occurrence map of multiple ecological values. This helps us steer toward the areas that are important for connectivity, they're important for conservation. And back to my caterpillar and my biology lesson of the summer from my dear old mom, and a parting shot of Witch Island, as you might have guessed by now, also a favorite visiting spot, and just another example of sloppy sloppy is good. I like it when I was doing Forest Stewardship Council audits on FSC properties. Um, Often a conversation point would come up would be, sloppy's good. Hard edges are not so good, like golf course edges, but sloppy edges, dead trees, falling trees, they provide habitat for insects and woodpeckers. And back to that point about knowing your natural history, these animals are animals such as, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's a great blue heron. There's an eagle in the nest up here on Witch Island, and then the heron peacefully foraging below the eagle's nest. And that's information. It's pretty, it's poetic, it's gorgeous to see the heron. That's also telling you something, just like, and I might not have finished the story, when Sarah came out to look for the tomcod, and I was reporting all the birds that I saw out in my backyard, so to speak. That was information that was useful to Sarah as she was thinking about what kind of fish may or may not be here. If there are yellow legs or herons foraging, or bald eagle was gathering nesting material once, that's telling us something about the bigger landscape and the importance of that little patch. And so let's see here. I'm going to conclude there because it's 5:45. I threw in several extra slides to show that I am truly obsessed with birds. I regret not having a marine mammal picture or a terrestrial mammal, but use the birds as a proxy for the diversity of habitat types that we're all responsible for. And this bird uses freshwater wetlands. The loon uses fresh waters for breeding, but there's a non-breeding population in the saltwater all summer long in Pemaquid Harbor and elsewhere, and a winter population as well. And the woodpecker, forest structure, one of the many birds that uses standing dead trees. And I'll conclude it there, and actually finish shy of the hour. So happy to discuss and answer questions.
That's great, Pete. I really appreciate all of the diversity of things you touched upon there.
Maybe too many. Inch wide, mile deep.
No,
Mile wide, inch
great.
deep.
It's great. There were a few questions that went into the chat. One of them was about, could you discuss anything about the decline of ruffed grouse locally as it relates to habitat? Do you have any insight into that, Pete, or do you know anything about those populations?
I don't. That never stopped me from speculating. But I qualify it as a speculation. Actually, I'm not even going to speculate. I will add. I can't help but say something. I will add that what's going through my mind or my thought process is, well, okay, what is it? Is it a decline of breeding habitat or wintering habitat? Because I'll have this conversation up north, and hunters, some hunters, not all hunters. I'm never casting an aspersion at in any way, shape, or form. But some hunters will say, "Well, we just need to cut more. We need to cut more. You're maintaining too much mature forest. They need early. Well, they actually need late successional in the winter to feed on buds, and they need early successional for breeding." So it's just some insight into how I think about it. Is it summer? Is it winter? Is it a climate change challenge? That's another possibility. But I'll stop there because I'm now overreaching my knowledge base, but happy to look into it.
Great, that's interesting and helpful. And one of our participants chatted that Little Falls Brook Preserve still has nesting ruffed grouse, just for folks who are curious. So that's interesting to know. Great.
Any wood thrush out there that I've missed? I haven't seen this chat.
Yeah, I'll see if she when she gets a chance to chat back.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, and another thing I just want to touch on is, as you think of your own properties and where they lie kind of in the larger peninsula region, one of the things Pete mentioned was Riverlink is a corridor that Coastal Rivers is helping to create. And then there's another important corridor along the Pemaquid that is in the works as well. And so we're working to protect those properties where we can, and work also with private landowners. And if any of you live in those areas, that's an important corridor for wildlife without a doubt in this region. And there's a lot of wetlands and but other diverse habitats and microhabitats there too. Oh, she says no wood thrush observed in or around Little Falls Brook Preserve, unfortunately. All right,
Okay.
well we'll stay tuned. Maybe we'll
Yeah, it's a bird.
hope for the best. Yeah.
A bird worth staying tuned for. Yeah, the corridors, and the corridor is a word I used. We use in ecology a lot, and it's the idea that if one big contiguous patch is probably the ideal, but a lot of times nature makes, the way nature works is there are natural patches of habitat with natural corridors connecting them, or because of human land use management history, we've created non-habitat, and the only way to connect these various patches of habitat is through more of a linear feature. And so that's where corridor comes in, and the idea that if I want to hear, my expression is, if I want to hear a hermit thrush 20 years from now, there need to be multiple patches connected, and 100 years from now, that movement is maybe occurring across latitude and upslope toward the Appalachian Mountains. So that's to bring it back home, there's the Riverlink corridor, and now we're working on the Pemaquid corridor, as Sarah says.
Great. All right. Do other people have other questions or comments they'd like to make about management questions for their own property, or just sort of general questions about things that Pete's talked about? Some of these big concepts. Would be happy to take any other questions. You're welcome to. Yeah, Pete. Sorry.
I had a question concerning the ruffed grouse, because I've been walking at Kai's Woods, and I've been also walking in my back Waldoboro pencil lot, where quite frankly, there are not any people. And so as a result, I've seen ruffed grouse, both in my property and at Kai's Woods. But one of my concerns, and it's something which is sort of racking my brain right now, is that I would love to have walking trails at Kai's Woods. But on the other hand, that may be...
George, get back near your speaker. I'm sorry, we are not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. But the problem with building trails at places like Kai's Woods is the fact that it brings a lot of people into what is otherwise an area that's been very undisturbed. And I don't know what it's kind of a conundrum, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. But I'd love to know your thoughts about this. I mean, are there places that should be, quite frankly, wildlife preserves rather than nature preserves where a lot of people can walk?
Yeah, that happens with a friend who was doing seabird work and found that kayak tourism out towards seabird islands in Newfoundland was driving the breeding seabirds away. They were being loved to death. I wonder if there's some kind of compromise, trails on the outer perimeter. I'm trying to picture the trails on the outer perimeter, fewer trails than you otherwise would have desired, or a trail that doesn't require a disruption of the soil and the trees, and I think I can also think of people management's a tougher one, trying to keep a limit on the number of people using it. Another way.
Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say another way to view trails is it can be, well, if you build it and publicize it, you might have a net increase of people. But if people already like an area, and you build a trail, maybe it steers them to just the trail rather than diffuse wandering. And the grouse, and it's not just the grouse, you know, other animals and that I'd be concerned about that that we can, me included, love them too much. But go ahead, Sarah.
Well, just that one way that we sometimes limit access, if it's just a sheer number of people we want to decrease, is just have a small parking lot. It can be frustrating when you want a place to go walk, but in this area, we're fortunate to have a number of properties. So, you know, if one spot, you know, only has 2 parking locations, then really they're not going to be able to have a lot of people in that location at any one time. So sometimes that helps too. Things like that can be built into a protected area.
It's amazing so the forethought that might have gone into some of the things I said, why are they, this is such a popular spot, why isn't there more parking? There's a good reason.
Sometimes that's the case. Yeah. But it's a good question, George. And the other thing is, within an area, I think, you know, you can sometimes pick and choose. If you've got you know, an upland area that's really ideal for grouse and you don't want people there, you just strictly make those trails go somewhere else that are you know, not if you can sometimes try to support certain types of habitats or groups of animals if that's a focus for you.
Yeah.
It's great things to think about, though, you know, for all of our own properties. I mean, even for properties that are not public in any way, you know, that don't have the public on them, but just personal private property, to think about what habitat is most valuable and maybe rare or just supportive of a diverse group of organisms. So
and the kind of the take home being that the heck, you know, I live in a house that was once forested, way back. It was probably pasture before the house went up, but anyhow, building and construction happens, and I think it's not an either or, good or bad. It's where do we do it, and if after a piece of property changes hands through a generation, the 5 kids scattered all over the country need to sell off a couple lots. Well, you know, kudos to them for saving 3 lots and selling 2. And with resources like this, and kudos for instead of selling 5, with resources like this, you can find out where those 2 lots ought to go. So I'm not saying let's build out the footprint, but I'm realistic, and people have to live places, and so this is all about trying to steer the best outcome.
well, this has been a great conversation. So thank you, folks, for joining in, and thank you very much, Pete, for lending your expertise this evening. It was great.
Thank you.
I will send up, put out a follow. It may take a couple days, but we'll send out a follow-up email to everybody. It'll have the link with the program, and it will have some resources, including things like some of these BMP resources that Pete was talking about, and I may include some information about native plants, for example, if people want to access that. So things about buffers, Pete just touched, you know, he only had so much time, so touched on some of those things. I'll try to provide resources, and if folks want to follow up with either of us, you're welcome to. So, all right, well, enjoy your dinner, everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you, Pete.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
You too.